I'm going to do quick introductions and then we're going to get straight to it.
Yeah.
First up, way to the left here we have Tom Hauser, who's the chief political reporter for KSTP Channel 5. Next to him is Lori Sturdivant, who is the a columnist and a weekly columnist and an editorial writer for the Star Tribune. Rachel Stassenberger is Capitol Bureau Chief for the Pioneer Press. And last but certainly not least is Mary LaHammer, who's a program host and political reporter for the Twin Cities Public Television since 1998. So we're going to get right to our questions here this morning. I do want to say we are keeping this very brief, but these people are seasoned veterans and we are so delighted to have them with us. So on our website is their more extensive bios and I encourage you to read them. First and foremost, special session called last night by the governor. We're going to just start out, and we're going to start here with Mary, and we're going to say, share your thoughts on the special session. How do you think this is going to go?
I think we have learned expect the unexpected this political season. I don't know that any of us expected this many vetoes to be staring down another state government shutdown when, again, the big picture here is we have a nearly $2 billion surplus. Last time we had a shutdown, we had about a $6 billion shortfall. So we're talking an $8 billion monetary difference here. We thought, oh, this should be pretty easy, even though we have divided government, right? People are supposed to get along when there's money to spend. I guess it's more difficult to get along when you have money to spend, and just the drawn out nature. It's on again, it's off again, there's a deal, no, there's not a deal, the deal's unraveling, no, the deal's coming back together. It's been, I know I saw a lawmaker tweet out last night, there should be a reality show called Minnesota Legislature. I think there is, and you can watch it on Twin Cities Public Television later today. I'll hand it over.
Rachel.
Well, I'll take over. I think Mary's absolutely right. And let's talk about a little bit of the unexpected just today. So I actually knew I had this event early and I had to get my dog to doggy daycare. So I went to bed early. I woke up and there was an email from the governor saying there was a special session. So literally it was an 11th hour. There were 11 hours between the time he called it to when all the lawmakers are supposed to show up. So that's uncertainty one. Uncertainty two is obviously the budget bills. One of the things that delayed this was that there are very mixed feelings about the environment agriculture bill. Everyone loves the agriculture part, but the environment part actually makes a lot of Democrats, a lot of the liberal Democrats who came there to protect the environment, quite squeamish. And so it's not exactly clear whether or not that will pass. Now just imagine all these months of waiting and weeks of negotiations. We still don't know if it'll pass, and it's supposed to start like pretty soon now. And then the last uncertainty I'll mention is that, as you know, the Minnesota Capitol is under construction. So we're all used to seeing the House in the House chambers and the Senate in the Senate chambers. Well, because it's under construction and the Capitol is literally closed down, they're all meeting in House hearing rooms. So it's not just a venue change. The other change that means is they don't have their electronic voting boards. So what you'll see is voice votes being called alphabetically, and people will say whether they're yes or no's. Here's the twist on, so that's interesting enough, right? And then here's the twist on that. People can pass. And so that means that, you know, you call my name, Rachel Stassenberger, I say pass, they go to the next person in the alphabet. And then they might come back to me. And every single member I'm expecting will be keeping little cheat sheets about when they hit 34 and whether or not they have to vote for these bills. There are Republicans in the Senate who don't want to vote for the bills because it helps the Democrats. There are Democrats in the Senate who don't want to vote for these bills because they don't believe in them. And Republicans, not to say they're just about hurting Democrats, they also don't believe in them. They think the bills got worse even though they voted for it first time. And so in some ways, this is the most uncertain special session that I have seen, which makes it for us a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and I'll stick with the uncertainty theme and talk about how unpredictable it has been to know what really is the rub in these weeks since the governor vetoed the big bills that provoked this special session. It seemed like this was going to be a special session about education, and yet the education bill, I would argue a better product than passed originally, came together pretty well, and there are probably folks in this room who can comment about the details of that bill. Then it seemed that the big fight was about the state auditor. That provision that was a surprise, changing the auditor's authority to audit counties was the big focus of concentration about a week or 10 days ago. This week, that issue seemed to be set aside, and the issue this week has been about the environment bill that Rachel just alluded to. And one of the surprises to me about that is that today's outcome may be determined by the caucus that has been the least involved in negotiation, has been actually frozen out more than any other, and that's the Senate Republican caucus. They control today, I think, the fate of that environment bill and the fate of this special session. So a lot of fun for us who watch things, but a lot of changeable things too. I know our families are all wondering when the heck this is going to end, and we have to say, we don't know.
Well, and I'm going to flip the script a little bit and talk about the certainty. There is one thing that is certain about the Minnesota legislature. When they're going to have a special session, they're going to pick the worst possible day and time to do it. And to me, a 78-degree sunny day in June that also happened to be my daughter's 13th birthday is the absolute worst possible time for me to be spending all day and all night at the Capitol. So I barely got here on time because I spent maybe the only 10 minutes I will see of her on her 13th birthday today. And it's ironic because 13 years ago, she was born in the middle of the Tim Pawlenty-Brian Sullivan endorsement battle, and she was born in United Hospital across the street. So I was literally attending the birth of my youngest child, and then occasionally venturing across the street to cover that endorsement battle that went, what, like 14?
3 in the morning.
It went on and on and on, and so I didn't miss either one of them, which worked out pretty well. Today, again, back to the uncertainty part, we don't know how long this is going to last. Optimistically, some people say late afternoon, other people say middle of the night. You know, we honestly just don't know. The most amusing thing to me about the end of the regular session, and then also the last couple of days leading up to the special session, are all the lawmakers saying they can't believe all the last minute stuff that is being put into these bills and how we haven't had time to read these bills. This is outrageous. How can we run government like this? It reminds me of the scene in Casablanca when the police officer says to Humphrey Bogart, I'm shocked to find there is gambling in this establishment. Everybody out. This happens every year. This is nothing new. And it's been amusing to watch all the hand-wringing going on, and also the hand-wringing primarily from Democrats about how they feel like they're not getting everything they want in these bills. And I think after a couple of years of controlling the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, and getting used to running the table, they are realizing again what divided government is like, and that even though the Republicans only control one of the 3 stools, that does give them a seat at the table, and it does mean they're going to get some wins. So we'll find out ultimately who comes out winners and losers in this deal. I'm guessing, as the governor has said, it's going to be a compromise. Everybody's going to find something that they don't like in these bills.
Tom, I'm going to have you along that same theme. You mentioned all the last minute stuff, and there's been a lot of publicity about that this year. And Lori wrote a column about does it make for good government in the behind closed doors kind of negotiating that's going on. You've all been around for a long time. Is that new? Is that worse?
It might be worse, but it's not new. It certainly isn't new. And you know, they've even established a commission not that many years ago that studied this, and they made recommendations on how can we improve the flow of legislation and this last minute where everything happens in the last week of the regular session and the last night of the regular session, and you have lawmakers screaming at the speaker or the Senate president, you know, for more time. I remember a few years ago when Michelle Bachmann, so it was several years ago when she was in the legislature, she's screaming at the Senate president trying to be heard at the end. This happens year after year. It doesn't make it right, but it does happen every year. They have studied it, they've made recommendations, but then nothing changes. And I don't know if it's going to change. Congress acts much the same way. And it may just be that it's the nature of democracy that it's very messy.
Lori, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I would add that I think there's been a change with regard to social media giving rank and file legislators a megaphone that they didn't used to have. What we are seeing with this last minute crunch and 3 a.m. conference committees is fairly typical. It had happened a lot, I think, back in the 70s and 80s when smoke-filled rooms and backroom dealings were more the norm. I think expectations of even of rank and file legislators are different, and those folks have a mechanism to complain and get their complaints before their constituents and all of us too. So I think the drumbeat for change is louder from the rank and file than I've heard it in a while.
And I would actually agree with that. And here's one benefit for those of us who sort of like transparency. You know, most of us up here are kind of geeks and we like to read the bills that we're reporting on. I know it's crazy. But one of the benefits of divided governments is the minorities in both parties represent both parties. So when the Senate Republicans complain, you know, the Democrats can say, that's just the Republicans. And when the House Democrats complain, the Republicans can say, that's just the Democrats. Well, it turns out we've got bipartisan complaints. That's actually a very good thing for those of us who sort of want more transparency in this process. And frankly, the legislature has tacitly acknowledged that this is not the right way to do things. They have developed rules that actually prevent all this. Now, they develop their own rules, and guess what they can do? Override their own rules, right? So they sort of know that this is not the proper, decorous behavior, but they keep doing it. And I'm, frankly, as someone who likes to read this stuff in advance, who likes to be able to plan my life at least a little bit, you know, I think that the outcry this year may actually have some impact.
And I think the specific outcry was interesting, that so many rank and file members signed a letter saying we demand 48 hours prior to special session of the bills being posted. And I remember I asked the governor yesterday, so you're not giving 48 hours? Oh, it's close enough, basically. There seems to be a whole lot of, you know, close enough. Most of the bills, aside from one, were posted more than 48 hours in advance. The other thing I was thinking back to is, you know, people keep asking, is it worse? Is it worse? And I'm recalling the 1 year when lawmakers actually got done early, not just on time, but ahead of schedule, that I recall was when 2 of the leaders were both running for governor. We always think, you know, when politicians are seeking higher office, they act their worst. But actually, I think it maybe brought out the best in them, because this was way back when Roger Moe and Tim Pawlenty were the leaders of their caucus in the House and Senate. That was the year I remember they got done early. This is the third, the famous three-way split with Jesse Ventura. And they were motivated because they had to face you, because they wanted you to like them, they wanted you to vote for them when they were running for governor. So maybe we just need more ambitious leaders, I don't know, to get it done on time.
All right, let's talk about the $1 billion surplus at the beginning of the session. And there was so much discussion around maintaining and expanding the infrastructure and tax cuts. And it looked like it was going to be all about tax cuts and transportation. And in the end, no tax bill, no transportation bill. Talk about that. Politically motivated, or did we run out of time?
Well, a little of both. I would say on the tax bill, well, on both of them, probably more politically motivated, but the transportation bill is one of those where unless somebody caves in on their position, I just don't see an area to compromise. Republicans will not raise the gas tax, and many Democrats, but certainly not all Democrats, but certainly the governor favors that idea. Republicans want to take money that essentially is general fund money and start treating transportation like they do education or higher education or health and human services, and devote money that way, and Democrats are staunchly opposed to that. And these are positions that are, you know, very few positions really are drawn in the sand. As we found out in this session, the sand shifts a lot. But on this, it's very difficult to see where a compromise is going to be, especially next year, which is an election year. I just don't see anybody raising the gas tax in an election year. And in terms of the tax bill, on the other hand, I could maybe see some tax cuts, because they do love to give out tax cuts in an election year. So I think next year there's a better chance, and it's probably part of the Republican strategy, leaving money on the bottom line. And it's not just, I think it's about $800 million left now, but as we just saw with the monthly revenue forecast the other day, went up another 53 million or something. And Speaker Dowd told me the other day he wouldn't doubt if, no pun intended, that there might be double that available in the next session, maybe 1.6 billion. He thinks that the surplus might double from 800 million. So I think there's a good chance we'll see a tax bill in the next session. not so good a chance of a transportation bill, at least if it includes a gas tax.
Well, I agree with all of that, and I think we are, and actually, we're further away from a transportation bill today than we were at the beginning of the session. Because one of the big talking points for Republicans going home now from the regular session is, in terms of accomplishments, we stopped a gas tax increase. You can't brag that you stopped a gas tax increase one year and then enact one the next year. So we're certainly now punting this issue into the 2017 legislature, and I think that having fought so hard these years against a gas tax increase, we're going to continue to see real difficulty in moving the transportation issue forward. I think Senate Majority Leader Tom Bach was the architect of linking a tax bill and a transportation bill together, and I saw that move as sort of a tacit appeal to the business community, to all of you, to say, listen, we're willing to deal on business tax reform. Some folks in the Senate DFL caucus are getting to the end of their long career in tax policy, and they're interested in doing some things with regard to making business taxes fairer and simpler in this state. But the price for that, in Tom Bach's mind, has been to get more business support for a transportation tax increase, both for a gas tax and for a metro sales tax for transit, which is really getting to be a big hurt. And so far, I haven't detected much response in the affirmative from the business community, but time might be on the side of those who are calling on the business community to move.
I would just add two things to what my colleague said. Focusing particularly on the business community, as you'll recall, the last time Minnesota passed a gas tax, it was over Tim Pawlenty's veto, and what I call the big boy chamber, the Minnesota chamber, said, override it, go ahead, you'll be safe. And then several Republicans lost their seats or had internal fights over that. And this year, the chambers are less united. There are certainly, most of the chambers say we absolutely need more transportation investment, but they're not all of a piece on how to pay for that, and that's the big question. Here's the one positive that came out of the series of transportation discussions at the Capitol. When this year started, the Democrats were saying we need to spend billions and billions and billions and billions. The Republicans were saying we're not so sure about the billions and billions, maybe billion. Well, they left all saying we need to spend about $7 billion on transportation over the next 10 years. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a huge leap, but actually acknowledging, as you know, in 12-step, acknowledging the problem is the first part of the solution. Well, they've taken that first step. They haven't quit drinking yet, but they have at least acknowledged that they have a problem.
I think you just put the legislature in therapy.
Does anyone not think the legislature needs therapy?
Why did she look at me when she said that?
So the tax part, I do think next session there is a good chance of some tax cuts. The governor was willing to play ball, Bach was willing to play ball. I think Democrats and Republicans will come together on some tax relief, especially if they have more money to spend. And by the way, it is spending. I know some people like to run fast and loose with those numbers, but tax cuts do cost money. So it depends on how everybody wants to book those tax cuts, but I think, some business taxes, Social Security, income, there are some ideas that Democrats and Republicans like. Transportation, I do think the biggest story out of this session was agreeing on the need. That's a huge number, to hit 7 and, to be between 7 and 10 billion and say, yes, that's the need. How you get there, I don't see compromise on the horizon. And I was recalling exactly a year ago writing my session summary story, and my summary was transportation was the biggest failure of the previous legislature. Once again, transportation will probably be the biggest failure of this legislature, and it's probably not news, because I think we expected it. This one is just too politically difficult in an election year next year for lawmakers to take a tough vote. And the broader question is there another source besides the gas tax? Is there something else? Because everyone agrees you need new money now. There's agreement on that, but is there something besides the gas tax? Do you want to compete with general fund? And then the discussion comes, do you want to fund transportation or children and the elderly? That's not a fun game to play, right? The kids and the elderly probably win every time, but lawmakers have put the onus on you, and they have said the state chamber, local chambers, regional chambers, they're the ones who need to step up. If they care about this and want us to do something about it, they have said all of you need to be more vocal and fight for it.
Can I add one thing to that? The interesting thing is Republicans try to flip that and say, well, you know, the children and the elderly also use the highways. And they need to be safer. And so why shouldn't transportation compete with these other important, I mean, everybody agrees transportation is vitally important. And Republicans are trying to make the case, why not have it compete with other things like education and health and human services? Doesn't mean the other things have to be shorted, but why can't it all be in the same pot as opposed to relying on this politically volatile gas tax? So that is part of the debate I think we're going to hear going
Let me
forward.
jump in the debate too. Transportation has constitutionally dedicated resources, and then that brings a whole debate. You know, some folks wanted to constitutionally dedicate resources to nursing homes and the elderly, and do we keep loading on ballot questions? I don't know if any of you liked the ballot questions too much. The last couple that went on, we voted down. So do we want to keep dedicating money and having less flexibility in the Constitution?
Always a great conversation. This is a question we asked last year. It was the best question we asked. So what were the biggest underreported stories of 2015 or unreported stories? And what stories couldn't you get past your producers or your editors? Who wants to start? Rachel, let's start with you.
You got
I'm actually lucky this year. I'm the Capitol Bureau Chief at the Pioneer Press, and so there weren't any stories that I couldn't get past anyone, because I tended to say yes to myself. Not always, though, you know.
There's an interesting conversation.
Oh, we fight all the time, me and Rachel. We're not always
phones.
Right, exactly. This one's the work phone, this one's the home phone, and they always debate each other. In any case, I actually think there's two things that I'll make a pitch for that I did some coverage on, we all did some coverage on, but frankly we can always do more, which is ethics and campaign finance. There was just yesterday one of the people who was pretty high up in the Minnesota Health Department went over and started working for a medical marijuana firm, and this particular staffer had been involved in medical marijuana at the state. You know, I was working on other things yesterday, but there's nothing that I know of that makes that illegal. It doesn't feel right, but it's not illegal. And Minnesota actually has this reputation as a very clean state. You know, we haven't, unlike, you know, I don't know, Illinois, Florida, we haven't really had a lot of lawmakers go to jail. We haven't had a governor indicted since I don't know when. I mean, it's kind of dull. But essentially, in the ethics and transparency world, people say you get the laws that you need, and we haven't needed very strong laws. And so, you know, one of the stories that we at the Pioneer Press did this year was about lawmakers becoming lobbyists. And sometimes it happens within days. They're representing the people one day, and then 4 days later, they're representing the people who are asking for something from the legislature. It's all kind of uncomfortable, but Minnesota really hasn't done very much with this. So this year, it was not a major issue. We had divided government, we had the surplus, we had transportation, we had all these other fights. And so it wasn't really a focus, but I actually do think that Minnesota probably deserves slightly better laws, and people would appreciate it.
I'd like to second Rachel's motion on campaign finance reform. One of the things that did happen, though it was, I think, maybe originally in the tax bill that didn't pass, we have, again, for the second time, denied Minnesotans the opportunity to get a refund for a campaign finance contribution, a small one. There's good evidence, nationally studied evidence by political scientists, that provision in Minnesota law has kept our campaigns financed much more by small donors and comparatively less by large special interests. That's now a tool that again has been taken away, and probably in perpetuity, since it now has bipartisan fingerprints on its demise. We have to keep an eye, I think, on how our campaigns are financed. That's a continuing hurt. I'll mention two things that were pluses from the regular session. You don't hear a lot of pluses from the regular session that I think were undercovered. One is major investments in a comprehensive mental health strategy that look to be really solid and have strong bipartisan backing. It's always been the claim of people who are in the know about mental health in Minnesota that we really don't have a mental health system. We're working now to build one, and that's a big plus. Another big plus was the change in the way that long-term care institutions, nursing homes primarily, are financed. A new formula that's going to really acknowledge the actual cost of providing this care as opposed to a variety of grandfathered assumptions that weren't working. It does mean more money in the short term. It was $138 million over 2 years of an increase. It should bring some stability to some institutions that are pretty vital to all of our communities.
I'll jump in. And I think it's an issue that we're going to be spending a lot of our time on today. I think agriculture and the environment were probably undercovered issues that now we find ourselves on the brink of another government shutdown, possibly just because of agriculture and environmental issues. The governor really surprised all of us, I think, by farm buffer strips being the thing he wanted to fight for. And when we asked him the other day, what'd you win? Because we're not sure he won a lot this session. One of his wins he cites, and while it's watered down, is this farm buffer strip to help protect our water. And when I think back to the last government shutdown, 2005, there was only one budget bill that passed before government shutdown. That one bill was the ag bill. And here we're staring at another possible government shutdown, and it's over the ag bill, which is now wrapped into environment. So we probably could have done a better job covering that all session. And I think we were surprised again by the governor really going to bat for clean water and the environment, and now kind of backing off a little bit and telling Democrats, I'll go to your districts and campaign against you if you vote against this ag and environment bill today. So it's called the greening of Mark Dayton, and I don't know if he's turning a little brown today now, but I think they're big issues. And with the bird flu as well, that is in the ag and environment bill. We are going on 10 million birds down, a huge industry, top turkey producer, millions of chicken layer egg operations too. This is a huge economic impact for the state and the country.
And again, the egg bill didn't rise to the top until after early childhood education, and the state auditor issue had kind of gone away. And it's just amazing how every day it was somebody in one of the caucuses said it was like whack-a-mole. Every time one issue would pop up, you'd knock it down, then another one would pop up somewhere else. And in television, the hardest stories to get by anybody in management or our news meetings in the morning are any story that does not have video opportunities, visuals that go with it. The net metering in the energy bill recently, good example of that. You could hear crickets in a news meeting if you brought up the idea of covering that story. I think, and this is similar, the story I think in more of a macro sense that I think needs more scrutiny is in a couple of areas. Overall, why has the state budget really exploded from, 29 billion not that many years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, and this year it's going to be, I think, $42 billion. That is a huge increase. And then in the area of higher education, tuition is going to go up. They got a significant amount of money, but not enough to keep tuition frozen. And I don't think there's enough scrutiny, not just at the University of Minnesota, but I'm talking private colleges, talking higher education overall. Why is it exploding in cost? And this hits home to me because I have 2 kids in college, and not just here in Minnesota. I've got one in Missouri and one at the University of Minnesota. And it's stunning how the cost of higher ed has gone up more than healthcare. And we all go crazy about healthcare, but higher education cost is exploding. And I don't think there's enough scrutiny about why is that. And I think we need to look at that, and then just the overall level of spending. Is it sustainable? Speaker Dowd is touting the fact that this year, according to his numbers, the overall budget will go up about 5.2%, which he says is the 3rd lowest in 50-some years. That's still a decent increase, but is it sustainable year after year? I think that's a story that it's hard to get at. It's hard to drill down because there's so many variables. But I think it's something that needs a closer look.
And we'll be talking about that at our legislative breakfast next season. We're going to go out to the audience because I know a couple of you might have some questions. So raise your hand. Brad will bring a microphone to you. We're going to get some questions out of the audience. Don't be shy.
I'm curious what you all think about the urban-rural divide and how it played out in the end. I mean, we heard a lot about it post-election and coming in. How do you think that played out?
Well, I'll just start with what we see right in front of us. As we mentioned, the environment bill in the Minnesota Senate has kind of a tenuous past. Now, we're talking about urban versus rural Democrats there. And it is something that, goes back years that the two sides have been fighting. I actually think one of the things that some of us sort of overplayed was the Republicans won because they took over the rural areas. I actually think there's a more interesting story there, which is Republicans did not do all that well in the suburbs. Democrats did quite well in the suburbs, which added another layer of complexity, because if you're giving all the money, to rural interests, you're not bringing it back to the Twin Cities, to the suburbs. Transportation, which is obviously very big in this area, did not get funded. So I think that's a sort of unwritten story that we'll have to game out. And the last thing about the urban-rural divide that I'll mention, I'm sure my colleagues have other things to say, is a lot of the rural folks are saying we did not do all that well this session. Despite the big fights, we actually didn't benefit all that much. It's not that much different. So this may be sort of a, big brother cities and little brother outside the cities have this constant sibling rivalry, and a lot of people would say the rural sibling did not get the best cut of meat.
Well, that actually is touching on the thought I had about this issue, which is that there's a real dispute over what it is that the rural area wants and needs. The outstate part of the state has lagged since the end of the recession and recovery. Average incomes are lagging, and by a number of other metrics, it looks like a region that deserves extra attention. So is the remedy to put more state money into broadband development and more state money into transportation that's targeted to the roads outstate, or is the remedy to reduce the size of government? That's that philosophical dispute about how do we aid the rural area seems to be an interesting point of division now between the two parties. I think what was decided, what was said a lot in the last campaign was that rural areas were lacking a seat at the table, that state government had become metro-centric, whatever that means. Well, I think this year they've had more of a seat at the table, but I'm not sure they're satisfied with the results.
Just briefly, the thing I was most amused by was that after that election, it seemed like every where it appeared Republicans had won based on their votes in greater Minnesota. Every press release that came out of the Democratic Senate and House caucuses would always have some dig in about some Republican legislation didn't do this for rural Minnesota or did this to them. Everything was framed kind of by what impact it had on greater Minnesota. And I thought that was really interesting.
I especially love
even if we might have overplayed it a little bit,
all day the last day of the
they
session.
were thinking
And I
about
like
it
your
in the
retweet of
caucuses,
Kurt Dowd's,
and they'll be thinking about it
smiley
going
face.
into the next elections because
What
somebody
good
who wins
stories
a seat
you
in
get off of social
extreme
media
northern
that
Minnesota,
you
their
might
vote
not
counts
heard
just as much as somebody down
just
here in the
been taking a
metro.
look at.
And I think in many ways it really has kind of empowered a lot of the greater Minnesota legislators. I don't know how much that's resulted in any fruits yet, but it's going to be fascinating to watch how they play this as we move forward.
I'll jump in on that. The one thing, it surprised us, as you said, the storyline heading in was the House. Everybody thought the majority of the new majority was based on pickups, wins in greater Minnesota. So we thought that we were going to be covering the House when it came to rural Minnesota, not the Senate. And that's where we're at today, is we are watching this special session later this morning, the showdown, probably being a geographic showdown between urban and suburban Democrats and rural Democrats. And the Senate, I've been saying it a lot today, earlier, that the Senate does have a history of kind of having a conservative rural leadership base, from Roger Moe to Doug Johnson, used to be the tax chair, to Tom Bach, who's the former tax chair now, and Dean Johnson. The Senate has this history. The DFL Senate has been pro-life and pro-gun in the past. It's not unusual that Senate Democrats are taking a more conservative route. But I think that the tensions within, the assistant majority leader, Katie Sieben from Hastings, voting against her leader over and over again this year, speaking against him and standing with the governor on early childhood education. And Senator Scott Dibble, arguably the most successful legislator in the last 5 years at the Capitol, also defying the leadership. Senator Dibble was behind marriage equality, a bullying bill, medical marijuana. He has had huge bills, huge victories, and he is now openly defying Senator Bach. So I think looking at Bach's ability to survive this special session in next year will be an interesting read on this rural versus urban split.
All right, do we have one more question out there? Okay, with that, oh, here we go, Jeff.
Okay, I love, excuse me. I love Rachel's tweets. I especially love your Twitter feed all day, the last day of the session. And I like your retweet of Kurt Dowd's smiley face. What good stories do you get off of social media that you might not have heard if you've even just been hanging around the Capitol?
Well, thank you for loving my tweets, Rachel SB. Let me start with Kurt Dout's smiley. So Wednesday night, Kurt Dout, the Speaker of the House, tweeted out just a simple emoticon, smiley, right? I retweeted that saying this looks like a special session deal. And in fact, I knew it was a special session deal. I had from sources that there was stuff going on Wednesday night, and in fact spent an extra 2 hours trying to pull that out of people. And the firmest thing I had was from the Speaker of the House and his smiling. And so I think that often lawmakers will give clues of things that they cannot say out loud on social media. The other piece of it is that, frankly, we form better relationships with lawmakers, with constituents. There are some people in this audience that I've actually met, hi Kelly, only because we were both on Twitter and kind of active on that. I know about her putting her kids to bed. She has probably seen pictures of my puppy dog, right? Not to call you out or anything.
Back later.
Yeah. So I think we form a lot more relationships of people that sort of take us outside the bubble. The downside of social media is that it is a bubble. I've got, probably about 10,000 followers, but they're all kind of geeky like me. They don't tend to be sort of what I call real people. They're fake people. I'm not a real person when it comes to legislative behavior. And I think it emphasizes sort of the inside the Capitol business. Yesterday I tweeted a little scorecard that I put together that you can find on our Political Animal blog, because you guys probably aren't real people either, so you'll be interested in this. All the votes in the Senate on the education bill, the environment bill, and the jobs bill when they first passed, and a little column for you to fill in what's happening when what happens today. That is pretty nerdy, and it got hundreds of clicks. That is not what regular people want to see. Regular people want to know what's actually in these bills, how it will impact them. And so in some ways, social media has sort of been the push and pull from the insider to go back outside of the Capitol and realizing what the readers who are, not all legislative geeks like me really want to see.
I'll add an editorial writer's story about social media. I sometimes use Facebook, but actually more than Twitter, because Facebook seems to allow for a little longer, thoughtful reactions. I use Facebook to test editorial ideas to see if indeed is my idea something that is resonating with people. So I think last week on a Tuesday in the evening I posted some of my frustration with the lack of transparency, how we had been in stakeout mode outside the governor's residence or office for an awfully long time, and we're feeling frustrated about that. I wanted to know, was that just a Capitol journalist's anxiety concern or an insider's concern, or did real people care about this too? So I posted this frustration, and within 2 hours I had more than 200 people click like. So I got the sense, yes, people do care in Minnesota about how transparent the government is, and they too were getting disgusted with a situation where only a few people were making very important decisions about what is essentially half of the state budget that's still in play in the special session today. I appreciate that opportunity, and so I like Facebook for that reason, and please join me on Facebook.
All right, last question, because I got to get these folks out of here. So the last question is Senator Bach has said he is not sure he can deliver the votes to pass this, and gave the governor a crack at the caucus last night to talk to them. And he came out and he said, I'm not confident, but I'm optimistic. So yes or no, start with Tom, pass it down. Are we going to get out of the special session today with the bills intact?
If there were windows in this building, you would see that it's going to be 78 and sunny today. And so I say yes, members are going to want to get back to their districts. They see the writing on the wall. They've been debating these issues for 5 months. They've gone into sudden death over time. And I just realized, as the governor said yesterday, at some point it just has to end. You can fight again in the next session, and it doesn't have to go on and on. I think there will be a lot of rancor and discord and a lot of grandstanding, but I think ultimately, yes, it will pass.
Now, Murphy's Law would say, no, we're not going to get done today, but I agree with Tom. I think that the time has come, and that after a lot of anxiety, and maybe after midnight, we'll see an end to this.
And I don't tend to give yes or no answers on things that are going to happen, because I try to follow the news. But I will tell you, as a reporter, there are two possible outcomes that I wouldn't mind. The first one is they get done, just so they can be out of our hair, so we're not covering this on again, off again. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And we can move on to other things, and we've all got great things planned besides summer vacation work-wise. The second thing is the bill fails. That would be, and I'm sure the Democrats and the Republicans in the legislature in this room would hate to hear this, that would be a heck of a lot of fun to cover. If the bill fails, that is a big blow to Tom Bach, that's a big blow to the governor, that empowers the liberal Democrats who are against this environmental bill, it empowers the Republicans. So, if we have to continue this, on again, off again thing, I think that'd be a little dramatic.
I'll close the way I opened, expect the unexpected. I'm not comfortable with the yes or no on this. I'm not sure. I agree. I think the momentum is towards it's a beautiful day. They've been at this for a long time. Monday, things get real. Monday, the state stops taking reservations for state parks. That's going to make people really mad. We start going to court to decide what's open and what's not in a shutdown. And circle back to Tom and the birth story. I can use birth as an example on this. The last two government shutdowns in 2005 and 2011 produced shutdown babies in the state capitol press corps. It's true. I had a shutdown baby in 2005. The other female who has birthed since then, Heather Carlson from Rochester, had a shutdown baby in 2011. There are no Capitol reporters pregnant that I know of right now, so no shutdown.
They should mention the spouses were the parents.
Yes. Nothing untoward in any of those shutdown babies.
Press corps. Just want to make that clear.
That being said, join me in a nice warm thank you for our panelists. Anybody who's allowed to